You told us this was your restaurant, one of the women said. You said you co-owned it with your sister. Well, it's complicated, Quillen stammered. It's not complicated at all, I said. Quillen is my brother, but he has no ownership stake in this business. He hasn't visited in 3 years. He's never supported what I've built here. But he walked in tonight, told all of you that he was a co-owner, ordered the most expensive items on our menu, and expected everything to be free because we're family. I turned my attention fully to Quillen. You want to know what's actually complicated? Spending 15 years working my way up from dishwasher to executive chef, taking out loans I'll be paying back for years, sacrificing relationships, sleep, and my health to build something meaningful, perfecting recipes through hundreds of iterations, learning to manage staff, balance budgets, deal with suppliers, navigate health codes, and create an experience that people remember long after they leave. My voice was rising slightly, 3 years of resentment finally finding its outlet. What's complicated is watching you coast through life on charm and lies while I put in the work. What's complicated is being told I'm selfish for not funding your failures while you claim credit for my successes. What's complicated is having you show up in my restaurant, in front of my staff and my guests, and pretend that you had anything to do with what I've built. Quillen's face was bright red now. I don't have $8,000, Marlowe, you know I don't. Then you shouldn't have ordered $8,000 worth of food and wine, I replied simply. Actions have consequences, Quillen. You wanted to play pretend. You wanted to impress your friends by claiming ownership of my work. This is the price tag. One of Quillen's companions, the man who'd initially toasted to our partnership, stood up abruptly. I'm not paying for this. You said dinner was on the house because it was your restaurant. I never agreed to pay for anyone else, another guest chimed in. Quillen invited us, this is his bill. I watched as Quillen's carefully constructed evening disintegrated before his eyes. His guests were gathering their belongings, their expressions ranging from angry to embarrassed to amused. The women who'd been taking selfies all night were now conspicuously deleting photos. The man who'd been praising Quillen's business acumen was on his phone calling a car service. Within 5 minutes, Quillen was sitting alone at the table, the $8,000 bill in front of him, his face in his hands. I sat down across from him. Here's how this is going to work, I said quietly. You have 3 options. Option 1, you pay the bill right now in full and we never speak of this again. Option 2, you call Mom, explain what you did and ask her to loan you the money. Option 3, I call the police and report you for fraud and theft of services. Quillen looked up, his eyes red. You'd really do that, have your own brother arrested? You really thought you could walk into my restaurant, lie about owning it, rack up $8,000 in charges and walk away? I countered. What did you think would happen, Quillen? That I'd just eat the cost, that I'd be so desperate for your approval that I'd play along with your fantasy? I just wanted to impress some potential investors, he mumbled. I've got this new business idea, and I needed them to see that I had connections, that I was successful. So you stole my success, I said flatly. You wore my achievements like a costume because you have none of your own. The words hung in the air between us. I could see Quillen working through his options, his mind racing for an angle, a way out, some manipulation that would shift the blame onto me. It was like watching a computer program run through all its corrupted files, finding nothing usable. Finally, he pulled out his phone. I need to make a call. He stepped away from the table and I heard him talking to someone, probably our mother. His voice was low, urgent, humiliated. I felt a small twinge of sympathy, but only small. Quillen had created this situation entirely on his own. Every choice that led to this moment had been his. 10 minutes later, he returned to the table. Mom's transferring the money to my account. I'll pay you, but Marlowe, this is really cruel. Did you have to humiliate me in front of those people? I stared at him in disbelief. Did I have to humiliate you? Quillen, you humiliated yourself. You walked in here with an entourage, told everyone you own my restaurant, ordered the most expensive items we offer, and expected it all to be free. I gave you exactly what you asked for. The only difference between your expectations and reality is that reality has a price tag. You could have pulled me aside, he argued, told me privately that I needed to pay. Instead, you let me dig myself into this hole. You dug yourself into this hole. I was standing now, my voice sharp. I gave you multiple opportunities to stop. Every time I described what you were ordering, every time we brought out another course or another bottle, you could have asked about cost. You could have shown even the slightest awareness that resources aren't infinite. But you didn't because you've never had to. Your entire life someone has always caught you before you hit the ground. I took a breath, steadying myself. Well, tonight you hit the ground, and maybe, just maybe, you'll learn that your actions have consequences, that you can't keep claiming credit for other people's work, that the world doesn't owe you success just because you're charming. Quillen's phone dinged. He checked it and pulled out a credit card. Trenton appeared as if by magic. He'd been hovering discreetly nearby and processed the payment. $8,247 charged to a credit card connected to our mother's bank account. As Quillen signed the receipt, I felt the weight of 3 years of estrangement, a lifetime of resentment, and one evening of perfect karmic justice settle into something like resolution. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was an ending. Quillen, I said as he stood to leave, I need you to understand something. I didn't do this to hurt you, I did it to teach you. Everything in life has a cost: time, money, effort, integrity. You can't keep trying to skip the payment and expect to collect the rewards. It doesn't work that way. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger, certainly. Embarrassment, definitely. But maybe, buried underneath, a tiny spark of understanding. I hope your restaurant fails, he said quietly. I hope you lose everything and have to start over, and I hope no one helps you. Then he walked out, and I watched him go without a word. The story spread like wildfire. It turned out that several of Quillen's companions had recorded parts of the evening, including his increasingly desperate reactions as the bill was revealed. By the next morning, videos were circulating on social media with captions like, "Fake restaurant owner gets reality check," and "Brother claims sister's success pays the price." The internet predictably had opinions. Some people thought I was brilliant, that I'd taught Quillen a necessary lesson. Others thought I was cruel, that family should support each other regardless of circumstances. The comments sections were brutal on both sides. But something unexpected happened. The publicity, despite its chaotic origins, brought attention to Cascara. Food bloggers who'd never heard of us were suddenly reviewing our menu. Industry publications were reaching out for interviews. Reservations, which had always been steady, were now booked solid for 3 months. One food critic wrote, "The real story here isn't family drama, it's that Marlo Castellan built a restaurant so exceptional that someone would claim ownership of it just to impress others. That's the highest compliment a chef can receive." My mother called, of course. She was upset, torn between defending Quillen and acknowledging what he'd done. "Did you have to make him pay the whole bill?" she asked. "You know he doesn't have that kind of money." "Neither do I, Mom," I replied. "That money isn't mine to give away. It represents ingredients I purchased, staff I pay, utilities I cover. If I'd absorbed that cost, it would have come directly from my already thin profit margins. Why is it okay for me to lose $8,000, but not okay for Quillen to pay for what he ordered?" She didn't have an answer for that. Quillen and I didn't speak for another 2 months. When he finally reached out, it was with a short text message. "I'm sorry, not for being mad but for what I did, you were right." It wasn't much, it wasn't the full acknowledgement I might have wanted, but it was something, and I decided that something was enough to reply, "Thank you for saying that, I hope you're doing okay." We're not close now, we probably never will be, but there's a détente between us, a mutual understanding that we are fundamentally different people who want different things from life. I can accept that, even if I can't fully embrace it. 6 months after what my staff now calls the $8,000 dinner, Cascara received its first Michelin star. The inspector's report praised our innovative approach to Pacific Northwest cuisine and impeccable execution of technique married with local ingredients. I framed the certificate and hung it in my office, but the achievement I'm most proud of isn't on any wall. It's the team I've built: Dominica, Trenton, Dashiell, Linnea, and a dozen other talented professionals who show up every day to create something meaningful. It's the farmers and fishers and foragers who supply us with ingredients that sing with freshness and quality. It's the guests who return again and again, bringing friends and family to share in what we've created. It's knowing that I built all of this myself, through work and vision and stubborn determination. No one can claim it, no one can take it away, no one can pretend they were there from the beginning when they weren't. Quillen taught me something important that night, though I doubt he realized it. He taught me that success attracts imitators, that achievement breeds jealousy, and that some people will always try to claim credit for what others have built. But he also taught me that the truth has a weight to it, a substance that lies can't replicate. When you've actually done the work, when you've put in the hours and made the sacrifices and pushed through the failures, you carry that truth in your bones. You don't need to convince anyone of it. You don't need to prove it. It simply is. And when someone tries to steal that truth, to wear it like a borrowed jacket that doesn't quite fit, reality has a way of sending a bill. In my case, that bill was $8,247. In Quillen's case, it was a lesson in humility that no amount of money could have bought. I'd say we both got exactly what we paid for. 3 weeks after the incident, I received a letter that would change everything once again. It arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by certified mail to the restaurant. The return address was from a law firm in Seattle, Whitmore, Castellan and Associates. My stomach dropped when I saw the name. Castellan, it couldn't be a coincidence. I opened it in my office, my hands trembling slightly. The letter was from a senior partner named Jericho Whitmore, and it began formally. Dear Ms. Marlowe Castellan, I represent your brother, Quillen Castellan, in a matter concerning defamation, emotional distress and damage to professional reputation, stemming from events that occurred at your establishment on August 17th. I had to read it 3 times before the words actually sank in. Quillen was suing me. He was actually suing me for embarrassing him in front of his guests, for allowing him to incur debt under false pretenses, and for damaging his reputation through public humiliation that was subsequently amplified on social media. The letter claimed that I had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to entrap and humiliate my brother, that I had maliciously inflated prices beyond standard market rates, and that I had failed to adequately warn him of the costs he was incurring. It demanded $200,000 in damages. I sat at my desk, staring at the letter, feeling something between rage and disbelief. After everything, after paying the bill with our mother's money, after his half-hearted apology, Quillen had decided that he was actually the victim in this situation. He'd convinced himself, and apparently a lawyer, that I had wronged him. I immediately called Bartholomew Kincaid. I was wondering when you'd get that, Bartholomew said when I explained why I was calling. Whitmore contacted me yesterday to inform me of their intent to file. I told him it was a frivolous lawsuit and that we'd fight it aggressively. Can he actually win? I asked, my voice tight. Win? No, waste your time and money. Absolutely, that's probably the point. This is a SLAPP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. Your brother is angry and embarrassed, and he's found a lawyer willing to take his money to make you suffer for it. Bartholomew explained that we'd need to file a response, gather evidence, and potentially go through months of legal proceedings before a judge would inevitably dismiss the case. It would cost me somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000 in legal fees, even though I'd done nothing wrong. There is another option, Bartholomew said carefully. We could reach out to Quillen directly, see if he's willing to drop this if you issue a public apology and agree not to discuss the incident further. It would be cheaper and faster. Absolutely not, I said immediately. I'm not apologizing for defending my business and my integrity. If he wants to waste money on a lawsuit he can't win, that's his choice, but I'm not backing down. I was hoping you'd say that, Bartholomew replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Let's make this interesting, shall we? Over the next 2 weeks we built what Bartholomew called a nuclear-grade defense. We gathered every piece of evidence from that night, receipts, invoices from suppliers showing actual costs, the audio recording I'd made, statements from my staff, even testimony from other diners who'd witnessed Quillen's behavior. But Bartholomew wanted more. Your brother's lawsuit claims you inflated prices specifically to hurt him. Let's prove beyond any doubt that every single item he was charged for was fairly priced at market rate, or even below it. I contacted colleagues throughout the industry. I reached out to the chefs and owners of similar establishments across the country, asking them to provide pricing for comparable items. The responses were overwhelming. Not only were my prices in line with market rates, they were actually slightly lower than many comparable restaurants. The Chateau Margaux 2010 that I'd charged $850 per bottle, one restaurant in New York was charging $1,200. The Kaluga caviar upgrade, below market rate by at least 20%, the A5 Wagyu, I'd actually lost money on it because I'd wanted to offer my guests the best possible experience at a reasonable price. We documented everything. We created spreadsheets comparing my prices to dozens of other high-end restaurants. We gathered expert testimony from sommeliers about wine pricing. We even had a CPA analyze my profit margins to demonstrate that I was running a lean operation, not price gouging my guests. But the most damning evidence against Quillen came from social media. Remember those videos his companions had posted? Before they deleted them, dozens of people had downloaded and shared them. We collected every single one. In the videos, Quillen could be clearly heard claiming ownership of the restaurant, bragging about his role in building it, and insisting that everything would be complimentary. There was even footage of him ordering the most expensive items on the menu while explicitly stating that cost was no object because it's our place. This is going to destroy his case, Bartholomew said as we reviewed the evidence. Not only did he misrepresent himself as an owner, he did so publicly and repeatedly. He ordered premium items while explicitly acknowledging their value, and he expected not to pay specifically because he was lying about his ownership stake. If anything, you'd be justified in charging him more. He essentially committed fraud. There was another development I hadn't anticipated. The publicity around the initial incident had attracted attention from investigative journalists, and one of them had started digging into Quillen's background. What they found was troubling. My brother's potential investors from that night, they were actually victims of a previous scheme. Quillen had convinced them to invest in a cryptocurrency mining operation that existed only on paper. When they'd started asking questions about returns on their investment, he'd pivoted to claiming he was about to inherit a successful restaurant that would make them all wealthy. The meal at Cascara had been Quillen's way of convincing them that he was legitimate, that their money had gone to something real. When the truth came out, 2 of them had filed criminal complaints against him with the police. Your brother is in serious trouble, Bartholomew told me, and now he's trying to use this lawsuit as leverage, to paint you as the villain so he can claim he's the victim of family betrayal rather than a con artist who got caught. I felt sick. I'd known Quillen was irresponsible, that he was a liar and a mooch, but I hadn't realized the extent of his deception. He wasn't just playing pretend anymore, he was actively defrauding people. 2 months after receiving the initial lawsuit, I sat in a conference room for my deposition. Quillen's lawyer, Jericho Whitmore, was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with slicked back hair and an expensive suit that screamed, trying too hard. He had the kind of aggressive energy that suggested he'd watched too many legal dramas and thought that's how real lawyers behaved. Bartholomew sat beside me, calm and confident. We'd prepared extensively for this. I knew what to expect, how to answer, when to let Bartholomew object. Whitmore started with softball questions, my name, my background, the history of the restaurant. Then he moved in for what he clearly thought would be devastating blows. Ms. Castellan, isn't it true that you deliberately deceived your brother about the costs he was incurring that evening? No, that's not true, I replied calmly. My sommelier and I both provided detailed descriptions of every item served, including the specific wines and their origins. Anyone familiar with fine dining would understand that such items carry premium prices. But you never explicitly stated the cost of each item, did you? We don't announce prices tableside at Cascara. It's considered gauche in fine dining establishments. However, all prices are clearly listed in our menu and wine list, which are provided to every table. If Mr. Castellan had any questions about cost, he could have asked at any time. Did you provide your brother with a menu that night? Yes, one was placed at the table when his party was seated. And did you personally review the prices with him? No, just as I don't personally review prices with any guest unless they specifically request clarification. Mr. Castellan presented himself as knowledgeable about the restaurant and the dining experience. He told his companions repeatedly that cost was no object. He ordered our most expensive wines by name. These are not the actions of someone confused about pricing. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Ms. Castellan, your brother claims you set up an elaborate scheme to embarrass him, that you saw an opportunity to punish him for past family conflicts and took it. Is there any truth to that? I took a breath. My brother walked into my restaurant claiming to be a co-owner. He told his guests that he had built the business, that he was responsible for its success. Those are lies. I provided him with exactly the level of service he requested, premium VIP treatment. The only scheme was his own deception. The embarrassment he felt was the natural consequence of his lies catching up with him. You could have warned him privately. You could have pulled him aside before the bill reached such an astronomical amount. I could have, I acknowledged, just as I could have publicly contradicted his lies to his guests, just as I could have refused to serve him at all. I made a choice to provide excellent service and let him face the consequences of his own decisions. That's not a scheme, that's basic accountability. We went back and forth for 3 hours. Whitmore tried every angle he could think of, suggesting I was vindictive, greedy, cruel, but every question gave me an opportunity to present the evidence we'd gathered, the market rate comparisons, the audio recording of Quillen's claims, the social media posts, the statements from witnesses. By the end, even Whitmore looked deflated. He'd walked into the deposition expecting to intimidate me into settling. Instead, he'd gotten a masterclass in how thoroughly his client had destroyed his own case. A week later, it was Quillen's turn to be deposed. I wasn't required to attend, but Bartholomew suggested I might want to watch. "It's going to be enlightening," he said with a mysterious smile. We sat in an adjacent room with a video feed. I watched my brother walk into the conference room looking nervous, accompanied by Whitmore, who was clearly coaching him even as they entered. Bartholomew started gently, establishing basic facts. Then he moved to the crucial questions. "Mr. Castellan, did you tell your companions that evening that you co-owned Cascara?" Quillen shifted in his seat. "I might have implied something like that, but it was just, I was trying to impress some people. It's not like I was hurting anyone." "You don't consider lying about owning your sister's business to be hurtful?" "It's not that simple. Marlowe and I are family. What's hers is kind of mine too, in a way. Family shares success." Bartholomew pulled out a document. "Mr. Castellan, this is the deed and operating agreement for Cascara. Can you point to anywhere in this document where your name appears as an owner or stakeholder?" Quillen scanned it, his face reddening. "Well, no, but—" "And this is a record of all investors and financial contributors to the restaurant. Is your name on this list?" "No." "Have you ever invested any money in Cascara?" "I've provided moral support advice." "Have you ever invested money, yes or no?" "No." "Have you ever worked at the restaurant in any capacity?" "No, but—" "Have you ever contributed to the restaurant's menu planning, interior design, or operational decisions?" "Not formally, but Marlowe and I have talked." "Mr. Castellan, yes or no? Have you ever contributed to these things in any documented material way?" A long pause. "No." Bartholomew leaned forward. "So when you told your guests that you co-owned the restaurant, that you'd built it with your sister, that you'd made the business decisions that led to its success, all of those statements were false, correct?" "I was exaggerating. People do it all the time." "You weren't exaggerating, Mr. Castellan. You were lying. And you did so specifically to convince your companions, who we now know had invested money with you in an unrelated venture, that you were a successful businessman. Isn't that right?" Whitmore tried to object, but Quillen was already answering. "I just wanted them to see that I was capable of success. They were doubting me, and I needed to show them something concrete." "So you stole your sister's achievements and claimed them as your own?" "I didn't steal anything. We're family. She should have supported me instead of humiliating me." The room went quiet. Even through the video feed, I could feel the weight of that statement. Quillen actually believed it. He genuinely thought that my success obligated me to help him maintain his lies. Bartholomew continued questioning for another 2 hours. He established that Quillen had expected not to pay for the meal specifically because he'd lied about ownership. He got Quillen to admit that he'd never asked about prices because he'd assumed everything would be free. He even got Quillen to acknowledge that he'd been investigated for fraud related to the cryptocurrency scheme. By the end, Quillen was sweating, contradicting himself and visibly angry. Whitmore looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. 3 days after Quillen's disastrous deposition, Whitmore called Bartholomew with a settlement offer. They would drop the lawsuit if I agreed not to speak publicly about the incident, and provided a written statement saying that any misunderstanding was due to poor communication on both sides. "Absolutely not," I said when Bartholomew relayed the offer. "I'm not giving him a face-saving exit. He needs to actually face consequences for once in his life." "I was hoping you'd say that," Bartholomew replied, "because I have a counteroffer in mind. Let me make a call." An hour later, Bartholomew called me back. "Here's what I proposed to Whitmore. Quillen drops the lawsuit with prejudice, meaning he can never sue you over this incident again. He issues a public apology, which we'll draft, acknowledging that he lied about owning the restaurant and that you were within your rights to charge him for services rendered. And he agrees to never represent himself as having any connection to Cascara in any business context. What did they say?